work that they are passionate in. A lot of law students are sort of, very conflicted. They think they care very passionately about an issue, but they think they either have to go into public interest or they need to go into a law firm for whatever reason. And they think that you kind of can't combine the two. And obviously there are very different things between being in a legal services or public interest organization or being in a law firm. But I do want to make the point that you can go to a law firm and still engage in work that you care passionately about through that law firm's pro bono program. So you don't always need to choose one or the other. And I think that's something that, is just helpful to keep in mind as you're trying to think about, what your future looks like and, where you want to go post law school. And the other thing that I will say, and I'm sure, Karen can talk about this as well, is that, pro bono really provides in particular our junior associates with really important skills development opportunities. When you work at a large law firm, you tend to be part of a big group. And especially as a junior associate, you're working on a team, you are doing document reviews, things like that. When you are handling a pro bono matter, you are managing that matter, under the supervision of a more senior person and the organizations you're working with. But it really gives you an opportunity to manage a case, to learn new skills, to interact with a client in ways that can make you feel really passionate about being a lawyer. So I will end it with that and turn it over because I've been babbling for a while. I will take it back to you.
Well, I'm kicking it back over to Karen to talk about the importance of pro bono volunteers in your work, how pro bono helps them. And I can't help but just tee off a bit of what Marcia said, which is that when I was at a large law firm, the first time I got to experience the origination process of what it is to have a client sign a retainer agreement was absolutely in a pro bono case. And it's really going to be the only first way a junior associate gets that opportunity. So just really emphasizing there are so many ways to develop a wide variety of skills, including simply practice management skills, by engaging in pro bono wherever you are, including in private practice. Karen.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll say that Marcia did a great job of kicking it off here and talking about immigration pro bono in the big, large law firm setting. I'm only going to disagree with her about one thing, which is the way she undercut her own expertise, especially in the international human rights arena. That global immigration pro bono and refugee issues in particular are one where my hat's off to Marcia. So don't let her minimize her own contributions there. The issue about how volunteers help, I have a small docket of matters where I'm the lead lawyer on the case, but by far that's not it for most of them. In our context, mentoring and supervising the associate volunteers who are doing the work in the cases, that's how the work gets done. So volunteers are critical in the ability to not only do that job, but have that job. If it wasn't that, in our context, they wouldn't need me. As Marcia said, the volunteers help the organizations and the clients by getting the work done, and most of the time successfully. I have to say that well-screened cases and well-trained, well-mentored volunteers should win most of the time. And in this area, I think frequently they do, and they do it at the frontline level, kind of the first place they get involved, whether it's an administrative application or immigration court, or if a lawyer comes in for the first time at the appellate level. When that good lawyering gets applied to a good case, it usually bears a good result. And that's that by itself is wonderful skill development for the lawyers involved. But it's not only litigation or skills in an administrative hearing, but also negotiation, and that can be negotiation with difficult opposing counsel. Sometimes in the administrative interview context, it's negotiation actually face-to-face with the case adjudicator. It's public speaking in the training context. And when we get to the policy part, I'll say more, but just like this, a lot of panels, training, speaking opportunities, even up to the level of congressional testimony comes from developing expertise in the areas that we're talking about. And another place for skill development for lawyers, young associates in this area is on the ethics front, because it's common that, as you just said, Andrea, about the doing an engagement letter for the first time, issues of dual representation, issues of conflicts, issues of when you need to withdraw, dealing with credibility issues that may arise if your client has not been completely forthcoming with you about some issue. How and when you withdraw is something that comes up with these cases, and lawyers frequently have to grapple with them for the first time in their pro bono cases, because these are handled at a higher level in other types of matters. So it's a great training ground all the way around for that. Another thing I'll say is client counseling. Associates don't get that experience early on in their billable matters, but here they do. They have to help people. You know, the lawyers don't make the decisions for the clients about what they should do, but they do have to learn to explain the pros and cons, the risks and benefits of various courses of action, and help the clients to reach their own decisions about the course of action they want to proceed. And that's a great foundation in good lawyering. And I'll also say it's good grounding in terms of being a general human being, dealing with people whose life circumstances are different from your own. And I'll say many of our lawyers are not that far removed in their upbringing and their home experiences from what some of the clients are facing, but they may have moved away from it. Others, it's a world that some of our lawyers have never seen, issues they've never had to think about. And it's an education and a human grounding in those types of issues. So that definitely benefits the lawyers. A piece of policy work, I know we don't have very much time, but I just want to say, over the course of my years in my role, I have had the opportunity to do a lot of work with the ABA Commission on Immigration, with AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, with CARE Coalition, Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, the Center for Migration Studies in New York, and a number of organizations. And that board and committee service has really helped bring a lot of opportunities into the firm. As I said earlier, where using the hands-on experience and actual case examples that come from direct rep to leverage those into meaningful stories that help change the mind of adjudicators, of policymakers, and sometimes even of legislators. So just some opportunities of that we've been able to work on as a result of that board or committee work. Our advocacy around the creation of an individual independent Article I court, the right to appointed counsel for immigrant children, the work on the recently increasing asylum backlogs and ways to counter those, many sets of comments on proposed asylum regulations over various administrations, amicus work, including litigation in the Supreme Court around the Arizona Show Me Your Papers law of a few years back, and recently, and Marcia touched on it, but recently work in the Afghan setting, the Afghan refugee crisis. And I think when we talk a little more about the human rights issues towards the end, I can give a good example on that.
Thank you, Karen. That was such an expansive list of all the different ways that immigration work exists, sort of as a wide variety of opportunities, not just in direct services, but in such a wide array of different ways to be impactful. Jesselyn, would you like to give the legal services perspective on the role of pro bono volunteers in your work and the kind of relationship between legal services organizations and pro bono volunteers?
Sure. So for us, pro bono support is incredibly vital to our mission and to the outcomes of immigrant youth that we serve. So children do not have a right to an attorney in immigration court, which is a really important distinction to make. In some other types of cases they do, but in immigration court they don't. They will eventually be expected to proceed on their own in these very complex cases that are overwhelming for many attorneys, many adults. They don't speak the language. There's a lot of different things that will come up for them during this process. And so if they don't have a volunteer attorney or do not have funds to pay for a private attorney, which most do not, they do not have one. So we could not serve even close to the number of youth that we are able to without pro bono attorneys. Just to give you some numbers, at this given time, our office has about 350 open cases, and approximately 200 of those are placed with pro bono attorneys. And there are more that are ready to be placed with attorneys right now. So we can help just so many more youth with the help of pro bonos. Our team is 7 attorneys, so we just could not serve this number without pro bono attorneys' involvement. And just for some kind of perspectives, a child with an attorney is 5 times more likely to be granted protection from deportation than a child without. And 9 out of 10 9 out of 10 children who don't have attorneys are ordered deported. So it's a very stark difference to someone having that strong legal counsel that Karen was talking about, and that good lawyering for their case versus not. So pro bono attorneys provide legal advocacy, and they also help navigate social service needs. As DFED talked about, there is also a social services arm of Kind, and we also provide a holistic model. So we are able to help pro bonos if they identify needs for their clients. Also the issues that may arise with youth when they're acclimating to a new environment, to a new culture, a new city, and they have this trusted adult now who can help them navigate these different things that may seem really natural or typical in our lives or in the lives of attorneys who have grown up in the United States or had these experiences. We may not be confused by getting healthcare, getting enrolled in school, these very set things that have to happen, but having an attorney and a trusted adult who can help you navigate those things and help point you and your family in the right direction is really important. Also, just being a strong, trusted person in the life of a youth who's experienced abuse, abandonment, neglect, trauma of all different types will really help them. So there's a lot of different facets to pro bono representation of these kind of youth, and Karen covered a ton of the different things that attorneys will gain. We believe that Kind pro bonos gain important skills because of our close mentorship model with the subject matter expertise of the Kind attorneys and Kind as an organization, and that positive impact on the child's life. You get direct client work, the interviewing skills, advice and counsel, advocacy skills, courtroom experience, litigation, negotiation and ethics, as Karen mentioned, and the many different just areas that you are starting to practice in, especially when you're a newer attorney or you're someone who's only done transactional work or other things. Our pro bono attorneys regularly tell us how inspiring it is to work with Kind clients because of the resilience that they see and the strength of these kids and the perspective that it gives them to motivate them to keep working even on the hardest days because of what their clients have been through. And how incredible it is to know that they've ensured the safety of a child and the permanence for them in the United States through their pro bono work. So that's really the view from where I sit and from legal services, and just we could not have the impact that we have. That's the bottom line. We couldn't do it without pro bono attorneys.
I suspect you might hear something similar from Deepa, who is able to share a different organization, legal services perspective, one that doesn't do exclusively immigration representation, but primarily and works with families and adults, not just children.
Right. I mean, I don't want to repeat what Marcia, Karen, and Jesslyn so eloquently described of the positive benefits, both of doing pro bono and receiving pro bono partnerships. I just want to elevate a little bit and emphasize from my perspective, because my whole career, I've been in legal services where pro bono has been central, whether it was my prior organization I worked for and now at AIDA. The main point is that it helps legal services serve more clients. It's just bottom line. IUTA turns away the vast majority of service seekers at our door. It's just heartbreaking. It's hard for our frontline people. And one of the ways that we can serve more people is partnering with pro bono attorneys to provide different services. I come from, my focus has always been direct representation. And I think the relationships I've developed and experiences I've had as a mentor, I'm kind of a evangelizer. I mean, I think it changes people's lives. I remember when I had a pro bono partner from a big law firm who said, it's what made her heart sing. Her daytime job was what paid the bills, but it was the pro bono work is what really motivated her and got her in touch with some of those passions she had in law school. But, for many reasons, didn't pursue another type of a career, but it allowed her to do the best of both worlds. And so it really also, from my perspective, always kind of refreshed my spirit to see that excitement when I would start working with a pro bono partner who hadn't done this kind of work and see that transformative power of helping someone who was vulnerable and touching someone's life and really changing their life. And I think from my perspective, again, it's just that I can serve more people and not just serve more clients who otherwise, to echo Jesslyn's point, who likely would not be successful because the statistics are pretty stark for pro se representation in asylum matters. But in my career, I've kind of been, the types of cases I've done have always been kind of edgy, pushing kind of the legal envelope for the types of classes of people who should be protected under the law. One of the ways, the organizations always have an internal expertise, of course, but one of the other things that oftentimes legal services lack are the resources. First of all, to really, when Karen said, like, if you can get well-screened cases and get the people in at the right time, you can be successful in majority. I've always been, sometimes on the losing side because they are cutting edge cases, but the possibility of success a lot of time just depended on the resources. I mean, if you're in a legal services case, you might have one staff attorney and a supervisor on a case. When we would use pro bono, it could be a team of attorneys, right? So just to have that many people to be able to do all that legwork, getting evidence, otherwise resources, witnesses, working with, dealing with international, like obtaining evidence from abroad, those things for a lot of legal services organizations is just impossible. And clients can't often pay for those types of resources to be deployed, even if a legal services organization could do that. So with pro bono, really the success rate was really a major part of wanting to use pro bono as well, because oftentimes pro bonos will provide those resources, especially with bigger firms, making sure there's no barrier, providing interpretation, translation, paying for experts. That's a huge issue. A lot of legal services for in-house cases simply do not have the resources to pay for experts, country conditions, medical, psych. There are free resources out there, but those are also very tight in order to get those resources. So I think for me, pro bono really is a key ingredient to the success of cases, particularly asylum humanitarian cases. And again, going back to my first thing, it's just a joy also to be a pro bono mentor with a team who's really invested in the client's success. And it's, this work is a reflection of my values. I chose this career and I feel lucky to do that. But through pro bono, we're able to get more people into the fold to help, the vulnerable populations that really, really need assistance. That's my spiel.
I love how mentoring also is such an incredible opportunity. I'm reflecting, Karen, on what you said about training and inspiring. You also learn so much supporting a pro bono team through a case, in some ways, almost more than taking a case of your own, or in part because you can provide mentoring. And this is where pro bono is such a multiplier, because it's possible to mentor many more cases than it is to take them on individually. And that's an opportunity to get exposed to that many more different kinds of case issues that arise. Just having that kind of like wonderful opportunity to learn and grow on both sides. So Adonia, the ABA is kind of a unique organization in terms of both facilitating legal services, but not being the same kind of legal services organization. So how do pro bono volunteers fit into that? And, how does pro bono help the Commission on Immigration?
That's a great question. And as I was listening to everyone speak, I'm like, I'm going to be coming with a little bit of a different perspective. We do have projects that do direct representation, and pro bono is critically important, but it is that traditional kind of one-to-one pro bono attorney relationship. Something that pro bono volunteers have really done for us are helping us think a little bit creatively and outside of the box on the delivery of services. Something that we've heard a lot in recent years is, there's not enough time. Sometimes people don't have the time to commit to a full case. And we do want to know that up front. We do, there's been a lot of times where we hope there's a great relationship with a pro bono, and ultimately, the amount of time and resources that need to be invested in the case to be successful may not just be there. So what volunteers have done for us is we've started thinking creatively about the delivery of services, and we've leveraged what the American Bar Association's expertise and our project's expertise to start thinking about different ways to deliver services. And this is where volunteers have been critically important. So we're utilizing technology, all the things that we've learned in the last couple of years through the pandemic. We've utilized more bite-sized opportunities, limited scope engagement, something where people are able to plug in for a little bit of time. Ultimately, our goal is that people will connect with longer term opportunities, that this may be the thing that gets them interested in immigration, and they'll go out to the on the ground legal services providers, whether it's IUTA or Kind, and try to, get more involved. But also all of our work in the pro bono sphere has also acknowledged the empowerment of immigrant communities and empowering them to be active in their cases, whether it's the provision of legal orientation, whether it's the pro bono engagement being virtual, and really investing in providing education and support to immigrant communities to be able to engage with their pro bonos. So volunteers have been great in us making this pivot. And not only have we been creating models where volunteers are able to engage virtually or on a limited scope basis, but we're also working really hard to create onboarding mechanisms for volunteers that utilize technology, whether it's a teachable course platform where people are able to enroll in a course and learn all sorts of things about a certain type of opportunity or case, whether it's thinking around different models of mentorship like office hours, and providing support to legal services organizations on the ground to start standing up projects like this and standing up different service delivery models that can incorporate volunteers and both attorney and non-attorney. Let's be honest, there's a lot of non-attorney volunteers out there that are so incredibly important and can be a part of the team and a part of the solution. So we're working at the ABA on empowering immigrants to connect with their volunteers virtually, and we're doing this on a few different projects. We have a Pro Se Plus project in partnership with HIAS, where it's kind of deconstructing the case and taking the interview representation out of it, but volunteers are able to engage with applicants through the creation and completion of their asylum application, and builds back on all the skills that Deepa and Jesselyn mentioned, these skills that people acquire working with people one-on-one, but takes out the element of having to attend the interview, which allows for individuals to not have to be co-located. So a volunteer in DC could maybe help somebody in Oregon. So there's ways to kind of use that technology and take the full representation out of the picture. Something else that the ABA Commission on Immigration is doing is we have opportunities to engage in virtual limited scope advice and counsel through free legal answers. People are able to create an account and receive questions and reply anonymously with immigration that's really critically important to immigrants. A lot of times people just need those simple questions answered. Where do I get a form? What happens after this? How do I change my address? Things that may be, easily enough addressed by a volunteer in a limited scope situation. We're also launching a lot of light touch clinics, virtual clinics. Actually, yesterday we did our first Afghan re-parole clinic and was quite successful. We're going to be doing those regularly. And also we are running a legal orientation hotline, a national hotline for individuals who are detained. And these are all ways that volunteers, both attorneys and non-attorneys, can get involved. But I think that ABA's bigger goal in all of this is taking it back to the legal services organizations on the ground and helping them, replicate this or, modify it to meet the needs of their community and make sure they're able to engage volunteers in maybe less traditional ways.
One thing that it's great to hear about is how many opportunities don't require serving someone where you are located. You just gave a number of really wonderful examples of opportunities, volunteering opportunities, both pre-JD and potentially post-JD, that you could be engaging in this work from anywhere with providing services to people who are far away from you, but still would really benefit from your time and expertise.
And I think, just to follow up on that, a lot of it is the provision of information. I think this has been echoed by everybody. We're even in the best case scenario where pro bono is extremely robust, we're probably not going to get an attorney for every individual. So even the conveyance of really concise legal information, whether it's through a hotline or through a presentation or some other way, or some sort of deconstructed pro bono engagement that just takes that little front end piece, can be so critically important to immigrant communities.
Knowledge is really powerful and empowering. And when somebody is, I can, say, coming through the process after entering the United States, the US government does not do a good job of providing basic, straightforward, understandable information about the process that somebody has to follow, even if they are trying as hard as they possibly can to check all the right boxes and do everything correctly. It's very difficult to do that without that information and knowledge. So Deepa, can I ask, what are the greatest needs of IUDA now for public interest lawyers and volunteers? And has the change in administration mitigated or changed those needs?
I think I did kind of elevate. The greatest need is for just to provide more legal services to more individuals, because again, every day we are having to say no. And I think also what we find is there's just so much. And so in terms of the change of administration, I to some degree, for some areas with some decisions, things are better, but in other ways, they're worse. I think there's been no improvement in the backlogs. Particularly, in the courts and in the asylum office. I'm seeing backlogs that haven't moved in, 5-6 years, and that's not improving with this administration. I think there's this perception that a change in administration was going to somehow make the system easier, the laws more generous, but in fact, that's not the case. There are some aspects I think we do see, and it's really locally based, so that it depends where there are some new frontiers where depending on the judge you get, the trial attorney, there are more options on the table. So I will say that. And from that perspective, I think for clients, sometimes where there's no great option, getting them out of removal proceedings particularly is something that I would have said prior to this administration was never an option. So I think that's one kind of bright spot. But I think in some ways we've seen with the proposed asylum, the asylum regulations, from my perspective, they are just as ungenerous, to be, using, a charitable word, as they were under the previous administrations, like some of the bans, and some of it's just incorporated in some of those regulations. And I think that in terms of asylum and some particularly gender-based work, I'm finding the same battles in terms of classes of individuals that I believe are protected that I did 10 years ago. Things that I thought were resolved, you know, just prior to the Trump administration, where we had gotten to a point where most judges, there wasn't as much of a legal debate that this class of individual, particularly say in gender-based domestic violence cases, that was, settled law. I'm having the same arguments, legal arguments in front of judges and denials that I hadn't seen for a while. So I think that is actually worse. And so I think what we, I think in how Karen described the different breadth of areas pro bono, from doing, impact litigation and then direct service. I think partnerships are really important with pro bonos and legal services organizations. IUDA has, currently is partnering with law firms in terms of challenging some of these laws and proposed regulations. And I think continuing that partnership would be really important, so that we can both make that micro change in terms of the direct representation of that individual, but more the macro change and some of what I think are very inhumane policies and regulations, because let's not forget, the system was built upon racism. That's what the immigration system was designed to do, was to exclude, particularly, people of color. And that's just the genesis story of immigration. And that continues on today. And you say even approaches how much easier for some nationalities to get TPS or other sorts of even temporary protections, even though, those aren't, those are very vulnerable types of protections, but other classes of people don't even get that, protection. So it's really important to fight the fight both on the micro and macro level.
And Jessalyn, speaking of fighting on the macro level, are there examples of ways that is engaging in that kind of systemic advocacy? And once you address that, what are the greatest needs that kind has now for pro bono volunteers?
Yeah, so we are engaged when it comes to ending the SIDGE backlog and taking SIJS recipients out of what's an employment class, which is currently, our children under SIJS get visas based on this employment category, and they're lumped in with all different kinds of special immigrants from all the countries. And that happened, kind of throwing everyone into the same pot, happened just a couple months ago. And it means that there's going to be a lot more backlogs for these youth. And so I think when I first came to Kind, and in the last couple of years, we were estimating, 5 to 6 years would be the length of a case from start to finish. And now we're, personally, I've just been thinking it seems longer and longer, and that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that because it hasn't moved in the last couple of months. It's still people that filed in 2018 that are able to apply for green cards now. So what about the youth that are applying for SIJS now? How long will it be for them? And so to remove them from this employment class and get them to be in their own class of visas, that these youth just don't get caught up in this same situation. That's one big thing that Kind has been working on. And I can just touch on something that we've been doing in DC as well for SIDGE youth. There, for SIJS, you can go up to 21, you can apply for SIJS federally, but in jurisdictions like DC, where the court only has jurisdiction up to 18, youth were really being cut off there. So we were seeing a lot of older youth coming in, 16, 17, that weren't being able to connect to legal service providers by the time they need to get into state court. And we have been fortunate that we have a great judge and a lot of good relationships that have allowed us to get these quick age outs in the door, but it is very burdensome for attorneys and for the courts. And so we have been fighting to get a bill passed in DC called the Vulnerable Youth Guardianship Bill to open up a different path to the order that you need to get SIJS in DC up to 21 to allow for more opportunity for these youth to access the benefit that they're eligible for federally. And that kind of leads me to the needs, because for that bill, there's a possibility of a whole nother set of youth who were not being previously served by Kind and other local organizations who will need attorneys and will have SIDGE cases where previously they were turned away. So that is going to be really upping our need. I think that even the courts are talking about having to up the number of judges that serve these cases. Currently, it's just one, and really just having to train them and train attorneys, and for us to also learn how to apply the law to this new form of guardianship where we've been doing custody and other forms of guardianship that already exist in the past. Also with the border opened up post-COVID and other changes occurring, more children are being released to this area and to other jurisdictions around the country. We need more attorneys to take on the cases. We're seeing many more cases come in. The processes in an immigration case, regardless of the form of relief, are quite long, as I've mentioned. So PBAs need to invest in the client and in the case and stay the course to resolution. It's really important to have that kind of longevity in case and that dedication. So that's a need that we see, and that's why firms are great, because even if the individual attorney leaves, it's usually something where the firm has owned that case and will continue on with that representation and make sure that client does not lose their advocate. We also always need pro bonos to engage in the training and work with Kind to shift when the law or best practices change, or when we want to impart some trauma-informed practices or other things, and to be open to learning about cultural competency, so that when different populations like Afghan youth are coming, or other groups that may require different approaches from the populations we've been serving, typically willingness to learn and grow and be able to serve the clients well, that's something that we really look for. With the change in administration, I did start at Kind under the Trump administration and have been here. And I remember early on having to, rush to get asylum cases in because we weren't sure if they were going to take away the unaccompanied children designation, and just the different pivots that had to happen then. And we've seen really positive things happen now, such as the end of the matter of AB, which really broadly restored pathways to protection for survivors of gender and domestic violence, and altering the SIJS statute to allow for youth to get married after I-360 approval versus waiting for their green card, and to provide a pathway to work authorization. Those are huge positive changes that really have helped our clients. The ability to work, I think, is the biggest thing that our clients in these 5 to however many year wait times, they weren't able to legally work, and that was really detrimental to their success and their experience here in the US. So even with these positive changes, the need exists and grows because they necessitate the requirement to pivot and implement new practices in response, and to ensure that all clients are able to access the benefits they're eligible for, especially keeping in mind that political changes do tangibly impact this area of law in a way that I feel like doesn't impact every area of law. There's just a lot of shifts that happen really quickly with the change in administration or political kind of landscape. There's a lot of uncertainty on the SIDGE backlog, other forms of relief, such as like U visas taking forever, victims of crimes. At this point, I apply for them, but I always tell my client, this is likely not the way you're going to get your visa, but we should go for it anyway. And the asylum interview backlog is a huge thing that I have experienced through the pandemic and whatever reasons. I think I heard something that said like the current cases, if there were no more filed, would still take about 10 years or some big number like that. And that's really frightening for the youth that only have asylum as their option. I have one that I've been trying to get forward, and the only answer we're getting is like, oh, find someone who you can swap with for an interview. And that's just not a reasonable way to fix the problem. So those kind of things are not a need that a pro bono can address, but they're things that I've seen during my time. And I don't know that that's administration. Like no one could control the pandemic, but there are really tangible things that we are seeing and that are really delaying everything. And so just having attorneys to be able to serve these kids when their cases come up and to answer the call when our advocacy hopefully changes the way things are working and gives the opportunity for these kids to keep moving forward in their cases. That's really the biggest piece.
Thank you. And, I'm hearing about all of these changes. Deepa's talking about prosecutorial discretion, the ability to get out of court. Jessalyn, you're talking about work authorization. They're all positive changes, but they are all things that require an attorney to navigate. these are positive things that are happening, but I'm hearing about all of them and reflecting, it would be nearly impossible for someone who's pro se to be able to benefit from these positive changes without the assistance of an attorney. So it's not really changing the need for the service. And Deepa, you couldn't be more on point. The Immigration and Nationality Act was grounded in racist exclusionary policies. And so I want to, I'm going to turn to Karen to ask, can you talk about the intersection between immigration and other critical human rights, including racial, economic, and environmental justice?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute myself. Yes, I can. And I'll draw to everyone's attention, if you're not already familiar with it, the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance has a working group on immigration, and they have posted a paper there on the website, the first chapter of which traces the history of racism in US immigration laws. So I really commend that to people who might be interested in this area. But basically, you don't have to look too far, starting from the Chinese Exclusion Act through the Japanese internment camps and that, horror in our history, and trace it all the way through to whoever was the disfavored group of the time, whoever was the other that the mainstream, US population wanted to be against at the moment. That's generally who you'll see targeted in the shifting immigration policy. Today, I think it's clear that Black, Brown, and Indigenous immigrants, asylum seekers or otherwise, tend to be the target of that racism, but not exclusively so. And a little bit of the flip side, you see some more favorable treatment of Ukrainians than other groups, because they, tend to be more white, so they get a little quicker action in Congress than some other groups. So those things exist. But what I want to say is it comes in and infects the immigration system in so many ways, from the decisions about whether to detain somebody or not, to the decision about how credibility is evaluated. And there are many other points, but all the statistics that exist for racial minorities and their treatment in the system, it is like over and over and over, it has a negative impact. And so having a lawyer doesn't overcome that tendency or bias, but at least it helps level the playing field, and it helps it get called out, and it helps a better record get built that informs whatever happens in the process. I can give two quick examples. One, I represented an asylum seeker from the DRC some years ago in a case, very strong case, political activist, went very well. The judge granted the case. It was a detained case. But at the end, after announcing the grant of asylum, he said to the man, and now, by the way, I'm approving your case, but don't go out and do something bad like rob a bank or commit some other crime to make me regret my decision. Completely gratuitous, motivated by nothing other than the person was Black, right? But it was horrible. There was another one I had. I represented a Somalian, well, with a team, but a Somalian asylum seeker who represented, testified about how their family members were killed. It was a woman who said that a warring party of a rival clan came up singing war songs in the back of a truck, took all the men out of the house and took them away and killed them. And the judge denied the case for credibility, saying that nobody that was coming to kill people would be singing. That's probably more cultural than race, but definitely there was an overlay, and that case got straightened out before all was said and done, but it wouldn't have without lawyers, because that's the infected images that some of the adjudicators have in their minds. On the human rights issue, separate from the racial issue, I'll say today, and you've heard some about it already on this panel, but the development of the law on particular social group for women, gender minorities, and especially the LGBTQ+ community, that law is very much in flux. And I would say without lawyers, the shaping of the law, much less the application of the favorable law where it exists, would go wrong in many, many individual cases if there weren't lawyers to make the connections. So the thing I've been working on most personally lately is the representation of the International Association of Women Judges on trying to bring the Afghan women judges to out of Afghanistan and to safety in the US and other countries around the world. But even that's even where the evidence is clear, getting the policy interpretations necessary to serve this group of people who are at risk of the most horrendous violence, clearly imprisonment and death, if they can't get out from under the Taliban regime. But it's still an uphill battle to get the decisions that need to be made to benefit this group of people. So it's, as we heard, it's an area that's in flux. The issues of the day may differ from time to time, but immigration law is really the fulcrum of societal attitudes on, many, many different issues and attitudes toward groups. So I'll stop there.
We are at the point in the panel where audience questions are welcome. I'm happy to keep asking questions, but we certainly want folks in the audience to have an opportunity to ask, either by putting them in the Q&A or coming off mute and asking. I think that works too. So we can pause for a moment to see if there are any audience questions about the work, career paths, anything that we've discussed, or anything related to immigration or human rights. We've got a lot of wonderful experts to hear from.
Oh, there is one question. We talked in the last panel about having to go to sort of throwback methods for advocacy, talking about going back to some strategies that were employed in the 90s with respect in particular to the human rights aspect of it. And I wonder if the panel could address sort of what are the tools that you are using right now? Is it individual case representation? Is it contractual work? Is it, sort of what are the tools there that you're finding to be successful or helpful?
Well, I guess one thing I could say on that is it's a constant back and forth and ebb and flow. The one you use is the one that seems to be working at the time. This is not the time that you're going to get very much legislatively. We tried on a number of fronts in prior administrations with legislation for the Dreamers. That didn't go through. There have been a lot of other things where you think you're close, even fairly recently, there's been a small push toward Article 1 legislation for an independent court, but the votes aren't there in Congress right now. So I think you have to know where you want to plant a seed and where it is and isn't realistic to actually put a full court press on legislative changes. But with the Supreme Court right now, it kind of makes it dicey about impact litigation, where I used to always think, well, bad things might happen below, but at least that's where you go to the courts and you'll get it straightened out. Federal courts, especially the appellate courts, things would get fixed. Now, I think even that is less sure, although in some circuits better. The Fourth actually has been getting better lately. Some other circuits going the opposite way, but it's a matter of choosing your issue and knowing your forum and figuring out what makes sense at the time. But with the administration right now, I think some of the advocacy is really at low levels, at agency officials at lower levels, and trying to win cases at the front line, individual cases with individual judges and persuading on individual facts in direct interviews. So right now I'm more on that side, but not saying that's the answer for all time, because it can and will shift, as things move forward. Let me let some others weigh in.
Well, and I see we actually do have some questions that have come in. And I can't help but say on the tools front, the administration itself, even though many of its regulations are atrocious, there is more room for policy advocacy right now in terms of just interpret the regulations in a more favorable way, make decisions about whether or not someone is eligible for a particular benefit because you're empowered to make those decisions. That kind of advocacy has been more effective right now than, I mean, even in the Obama administration. So just, as Karen said, knowing your agency. We have a question from Lucas asking, what are the pros and cons of doing pro bono work through a large private law firm versus working for a legal services organization? Marcia, can I throw that one to you?
Well, the pros of, working at a large law firm and doing pro bono work, I think are some of the things that the other panelists have touched upon, which is, a resource issue that, you can, use the resources of a large law firm to, really help someone engage in large impact litigation, engage in international issues, things that might be more difficult from the legal services side. So, for example, in addition to the direct representation work that, we do in the many different areas of US immigration law, we've done a lot of work, on the international level. So, we did a big project with the Vance Center for International Justice, looking at the treatment of Haitians in the Dominican Republic, for litigation that was being brought before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And, we have, in conjunction with our, pro bono partners, engaged in significant, impact litigation, challenging the Muslim travel ban under Trump, successfully challenging the termination of TPS for Haitians, challenging the Trump administration law, the strict asylum seekers at the border, the right to access to US asylum process. I could go on. And so, I do think that one of the benefits of working in a large law firm is having these kinds of resources. And we partner with public interest and legal services organizations. And I like to say that we're the muscle and they're the brains, because they have the, the expertise. I think the cons are that, at the end of the day, large law firms are businesses. And, there are expectations about, the amount of billable work that you are going to do and are going to have to do. And, you have to find a way to appropriately balance your pro bono and your paying client work. And, and that can be a challenge. So, I think, those are, you're not going to be able to spend 100% of your time, doing any kind of pro bono work. And, so I think that, those are things that, one, really needs to think about, when trying to make the decisions about, whether you want to go to a law firm or whether you want to go to a legal services or public interest organization.
We have
Karen, do you have other thoughts on that?
Well, we have two more questions.
Okay.
5 minutes. So
Andrew, do you want to get the legal services perspective though of the question?
yes, that's what I was going to say. So I was just about to say, so I want to hear the legal services perspective. And I want to say one thing about that before I turn it to you, which is keep in mind that not every legal services organization experience is going to be the same. There is a really wide array of different kinds of legal services organization, from small and local, deeply community-based that maybe is like a scrappy 6-group person. And then there's an organization like Kind that's international and has 400 staff. So there isn't just one experience in legal services. Deepa, pro bono.
I guess that being
services.
said, the positive is like, it's not pro bono work, it's my work. I mean,
Right.
I get to do what my life's passion is and get paid for it. The downside is I get paid a lot less than if I were working in the private sector. So there's a balance, and I think it is a huge challenge because a lot of us, especially nowadays, graduate with a lot of student debt, and it's sometimes for, you know, also in terms of people who don't come from institutional wealth or family wealth don't have a choice, and they really feel like they can't afford to work in legal services, at least until they pay off their student debt. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of trade-offs. So that's just kind of the economic side. The other thing is, you know, I can't speak for what it's like to be in private practice. I've never been in private practice, but I can tell personally, I've had a career that's dedicated to humanitarian relief. And all my clients have been survivors, mostly gender-based and other types of torture. And so what I see a lot, and myself, the people I manage, and my colleagues, is burnout. Vicarious and secondary trauma is real. And, you know, and even with when I mentored pro bono attorneys, I have to mentor them on that because maybe they haven't, you know, heard these types of stories before. But when you're working in the settings that I have, at least, that's all I hear. And it's really important that is a huge a consideration, because I have mentored either young attorneys or even law students who say, actually, this is not for me. It was wonderful. I love this work, but providing direct service to that clientele is not for me because of the type of exposure, you know, to the trauma people experience. So I think that's one aspect, but then you can do this kind of work in other contexts, not only direct service. I have other people who are more into policy or go into government, still doing this kind of, you know, similar type of work. So I think there is a place for different types of careers in public interest and legal services. And I feel lucky every day that after almost 20 years, this is what I'm still doing and still love it. So.
Okay, I'm getting the message. We have to leave it there. I couldn't help but chime in. Who you're surrounded with every day is really different in the two settings. The just sort of the values and mission driven work when you're in an organization where everyone shares the values and mission is a very different day-to-day work experience than working in a large law firm and like being able to carve out some pro bono from my own experience in both settings. There are two questions that we didn't get to, and I think we have to leave it there. There is a process, by the way, for filing judicial complaints, but it is, yeah, good. Karen answered it in the chat. Thank you for that. And then we have a question about ICE detention centers. And that's like a whole other
program.
whole program does have intersection with racial justice. Also, a lot of legislative changes that would be necessary for that to happen at a time when changing statutes in Congress is incredibly hard. Not that it's not important, just that the reality of what it is today, it would certainly require significant legislative change.
Thank you so much, panel. I'm actually going to give Adonia the very last 2 seconds because of the unique situation you sit in. You span between the legal services and the law firms and international and local. So I'm going to give you the very last word on this.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of pressure. Well, thank you all for joining us today. One thing I did want to arc back to that was mentioned earlier when we were talking about racism and immigration law is, you know, there is a tendency to follow the headlines when it comes to pro bono. I urge you to speak to the organizations that you're engaging with to ask them what their needs are. There's a lot of individuals who need assistance, and it's not always the folks that are in the headlines.
That is exactly right. Thank you all very much. Thank you, audience, for your thoughtful questions. We are 1 minute over because it is so very important. I will say that we will be circling back to many of these issues come fall, and in particular, check back with us during DC Pro Bono Week, where we have a number of sort of 2.0 conversations that come out of our summer forum or other forums so that we can dive a little bit deeper. The last thing I will say is look out for the follow-up emails, and please let me know if you need to be connected to pro bono opportunities, any of our speakers from any of our panels, or any further information. I'm here to be that conduit because I want you to be the change in the world that you want to see. Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.